want to start with the hiring decline. Last Friday, the job numbers came in. We saw that the expectation was going to be a little bit higher. It kind of depends on who you look at. There's one that say there was a 13,000 job loss with the correction that was made in June. Then the ADP, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, that's a separate survey. That's
a separate survey.
So the government's number came in, and it was abysmally low. I think it was like 22,000, and then non-farm payroll jobs that actually declined, right? The ADP number is interesting because that number shows a 53,000 increase or 54,000 increase, right? And it brings up a very interesting subject because one of the things that a lot of people have been criticizing for some time now is how the government collects this data, right?
Well, there's the recent firing that President Trump voiced that he believes these data numbers are inaccurate.
Correct, because what they're doing is they come out with a number, and then sure enough, 3 or 4 months later, they're revising the numbers either downwards or upwards, right? And it's understandable. I mean, the reason for it is they want to get the information out there, okay? But they don't really have all the information when they put that number out there, so they are extrapolating, from the numbers they do have. But what ends up happening is a month later or 2 months later, they have more information, and then they go back and they tweak their original numbers, right? So think about that, man. I mean, yeah, you kind of want to have a sense of what's going on, but you want it to be right. You don't want it to be changing, a month later, 2 months later, which is what's happening. Now, that ADP information that you alluded to, that's from a private company. They're the ones that process practically all the payrolls in America, right? So their information comes from a different source. The government actually goes out to the businesses, and if you can believe this, sometimes they send them faxes to this day, okay? Asking
Folks still have fax machines.
Yeah, I mean, it's like unbelievable, right? I mean, this is the government for you, right? I mean, they're like 2 steps behind the rest of the universe, right? Whereas ADP, they actually process payrolls. So they're seeing how many people are being added, who's being laid off, by what industries and what sectors, right? So I always like to look at the ADP data and compare it to what the government's showing you. And sometimes there are these differences, right? Where you say, what the heck is going on here? Now, so I bring that up because I think there's an important point to be considered here, what you alluded to. Trump fired this woman in terms of, responsible for the numbers, okay? Because she kind of asked, he's kind of asking the same question. What the hell's going on here?
Yeah.
I mean, you give me a number and 2 months later, you change it, right? And then when I was running for office, you kept saying Biden's numbers were great, and now all of a sudden my numbers are horrible, right? What the hell is going on here, right? So I think it's a legitimate beef. And I think it's an important subject because, man, if you're an investor in the stock market and the bond market, you kind of need to know the real numbers of what's going on in the economy because you're putting money on the table.
Correct.
You're investing a lot of money, and if you're not getting the right information and somebody else is, you're at a disadvantage, right? So it's really an important subject. But I think in general, I mean, forgetting about the quality of the numbers, okay, I think that's an important subject. The big question mark is, where are we in the economy? And I think one thing that we've seen, Wadi, is that, once again, Trump was right. I mean, he's been talking about, too late Powell, right? We talked about this, I think, a couple of weeks ago, right?
Interest rates haven't been moved at all.
Yeah, he keeps hammering, Jerome Powell, the Fed chairman, saying, dude, 3-4 years ago, you were too late in raising interest rates. Now you're too late in lowering them, right? And so he gave him the nickname Too Late Powell, and it stuck. And right now you're seeing, okay, that guess what? Trump was right, because now what you're seeing is, there might be a little bit of softening in the employment numbers, okay? And this guy is still, sitting on his hands, worried about inflation. And Trump is saying, hey, we got to make sure that Americans have jobs.
And the Fed Reserve, the board is supposed to meet right now in September.
Right.
Do you think them seeing some of these numbers, again, I think a lot of folks are already believing, although, again, Jerome Powell has been taking his time, Trump saying too much of his time. However, I think his rhetoric, speaking Jerome Powell, has signaled that he's sort of open to the idea that in the near future, there should be a drop. Do you think these numbers kind of put him over the top where, in the next few weeks, we might see that change.
The answer to that is absolutely yes. I think you're going to see a rate cut after this next meeting. And by the way, the market's already anticipating that. If you see when this number came out on Friday about the unemployment numbers being weak, the stock market reacted by saying, okay, this pretty much tells us that there is going to be a rate cut coming, because if you're starting to see a weakening, remember the Fed has two principal roles, well, actually three, but I mean two principal roles, one of which is to maintain full employment, right? So if you're starting to see a weakening in those employment numbers, that means the Fed's not doing their job, right? And the other thing is they want to control inflation, which is there are two sort of contradictory things that are going on right now. And that's what Jerome Powell has been trying to balance, okay? Because he's still concerned about inflation, because he thinks that when the smoke clears, okay, we're going to see a lot of these tariff increases being passed along to the consumer, right? If that's the case, then we might have a spike in inflation, and he doesn't want to loosen interest rates if we could be seeing another spike in interest rates a couple of weeks down the road, right? Or a couple of months before year end type of stuff, right? So he's got, he's trying to balance the two, but I got to agree with the president and say, man, once again, you're too late, man. I mean, you were too late raising them. Now you're too late lowering them, okay? And you got to get this right, and we got to get the data right, okay? And, we keep hearing about artificial intelligence, how it's going to revolutionize the world. Man, I think one of the first things for AI ought to be get a grip on the economic numbers, okay? Figure out a way to collect this information from employers, from multiple data sources that exist out there, and get us a good number that if you have to revise it a month or two after,
it's a minimal revision.
It's a tweak here or there, right? I mean, you're fine tuning it, not this. Oh, we're up. Oh, wait a second, we screwed up because when we got the numbers, we're actually down. No, wait a second. You can't have investors can't have confidence in markets when they're seeing that kind of volatility. Yeah, I mean, this is what we're telling you one day, the next day it's something else. Well, wait a second. I made investment decisions based on that. I decided to, put money back into the stock market based on the fact that supposedly the employment numbers are sound. Now you're telling me they're weak. Maybe did you just screw me over by giving me wrong information?
How do you think the average American, who's maybe not a sort of a day-to-day investor, read this situation? Because sometimes when you see the job hiring numbers go down, the expectations weren't met, some folks start thinking, is this a recession? Are people not hiring? But then you hear about interest rates going down, and for many people that means being able to buy that home, right? Interest rates for homes are like 6.7 or so, and that makes it somewhat difficult for a lot of folks. So is this sort of like bad news that will result in good news? Do they sort of cancel each other out?
Look, the truth of the matter is that the conversations that most families have, the quintessential talks around the dinner table, right, are much different than these conversations that we're having here, or economists debating, whether to cut interest rates or not. I mean, not everybody reads the Wall Street Journal or Barron's,
Financial
not
Times,
everybody follows that stuff. But you know what? It should interest everybody, because you may not know it, but chances are you do have money in the stock market, particularly if you have a retirement plan, a pension plan, whatever. Those are investing in the stock market, right?
Even younger folks with crypto, I would say. Crypto tends to also move depending on these items.
Absolutely. So it's important to have. But I think the average American reacts more to, in terms of these familiar conversations, right? What's going on in my world, right? Is my employer that I work for, are they expanding or are they contracting, right? How does that, if they're starting to lay people off, if that second plant that was going to be opened has now been delayed, you start worrying about those kinds of things. And I think that's the right approach, right? The other thing is the input from whoever's doing the household budgeting and purchasing, right?
Yeah.
What's going on in the grocery stores, I happen to buy the groceries in my household, right? If I don't cook, I starve, okay? So, for me, it's an issue of survival, right? It's a must, right? So, but I'm the guy that goes out there and I'm looking at the prices, and yeah, man, I mean, they've gone up dramatically, over the last couple of years, okay? I've seen some stability now. I mean, we talk about the famous, egg prices. Yes, they've come down somewhat. Part of that was because they ended up killing, hundreds of thousands of of chickens or something because they had some disease. But, prices are high, man. And what you alluded to, interest rates, young people.
Also, yeah, they're not used to these numbers. We're not used to these numbers.
They're not, because you know what? You've grown up in a world, your generation has grown up in a world where interest rates have really been at historically low levels, right? I mean, after the attacks of the terrorists on 9/11, we basically drove interest rates down to zero, for all practical purposes, right? I mean, the Fed funds rate was, practically at zero. In the case of some countries, they actually went in the negative territory, Japan, right? I mean, you had to pay them to put your money in the bank type of stuff. That world has now kind of ended, and we're living in a world where interest rates are much higher. They probably will go down now after this next Fed meeting, I don't know how much, but hopefully down, eventually down 1.5%, which will allow, people that are wanting to buy a house to have a more reasonable mortgage payment, right? It will allow people like myself, I've still got a mortgage that I'm paying next to nothing on, right? 3% or something, right?
Yeah.
Why would I sell my house to then get into a new house with a 7-8% mortgage, right? I mean, even if I downsize and I take some money out, it just
Options.
it opens up the market, right? I mean, it's you have a situation right now where housing supply is slowly increasing, but you have a lot of people like myself, older generation, that are not willing to sell their homes because they're like, well, why would I give up my 3% mortgage and I have a nice house, to pay an 8% mortgage in a smaller house, which means I'm going to be paying a monthly payment that is more than what I'm paying now for a smaller house? That doesn't make any sense. I mean, put yourself in my shoes, right? I mean, why would I give up my nice house with a 3% mortgage, even if I want to downsize, take some money out, because then I'm going to be paying with an 8% mortgage the same amount of money as the house that I have? Do I really need that extra cash type of stuff, right?
Actually, I want to ask you, because